Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. You'll recall that I told you about the 48 hours of mayhem that went on in Georgia last weekend, where there were not one but two high-speed chases, at least one of which involved shots fired at police. In one case, the suspect was caught and fought with the police, but of course they didn't harm him. In fact, they got him medical aid, and this after he flipped his own car. In the other case, you had three lawless crooks who got into a high-speed chase with the police, shots fired at the police, and a brief manhunt to follow, and when they were caught, the police let them have a smoke break. Oh, how very different the police's training works when the people that they're dealing with aren't black. The white media didn't say anything about how the police treated these criminals as opposed to black citizens, but that was just the beginning of the things that the white media and the police didn't mention when it came to this particular case, but we're going to focus on it today. When the arrests were made, Spalding authorities didn't release the names of these criminals at first. It wasn't until days after this gang of pirates terrorized Georgia County that the police, very quietly, finally released their names. That was deliberate. They wanted to wait until attention was elsewhere. Now, as the headline here indicates, the reason the police didn't release their names wasn't because they didn't know who these criminals were. The police know exactly who they are. They're known gangsters to the authorities. So if they're known criminals, why not put their names out immediately? Why wait? Well, we know why. Now, the three criminals' names are Cameron Smith, Raven Bullock, and Amber Long. And yeah, someone named their son Raven. They face a long list of charges from their recent rampage, all of which will no doubt inevitably be pleaded down to misdemeanors. Now, the sheriff in that area, a guy named Dix, said, quote, "All of the suspects are known to local law enforcement due to our previous run-ins with them, and we are going to charge them with everything possible that the law allows. Cameron Smith is an admitted and documented member of the Ghostface Gangsters." Now, the thing that's important here is when I came upon that, I noticed that the pieces that I read didn't say much of anything about the Ghostface Gangsters at all. In fact, it didn't say anything about them. So these guys are all known to local law enforcement. The cops there have had numerous run-ins with these criminals before, though both the police and the white media were courteous enough not to give details on the criminal records of these felons. About all they mentioned was that one of these criminals had outstanding warrants in another county. But this crime report isn't about these three in particular. It's about their criminal affiliation that both the white media and the police don't want to say anything about. Now, the white media and the sheriff only gave scant passing mention to the fact that these three are affiliated with a known gang called the Ghostface Gangsters. I guess that's because the Ghostface Killers was already taken. Now, of course, the white media didn't go into any detail about the Ghostface Gangsters, doesn't even say whether they're significant or not. As little attention as the white media gave to them, you might as well call them the Apple Dumpling Gang. And since the police hadn't done anything about them, one would think Ghostface Gangsters was just some sort of nickname that these three fools had given to themselves, and that clearly it must not be very important at all. And you would be wrong. What the white media and the white authorities refuse to tell you is that the Ghostface Gangsters are a prison gang, and that means white supremacists. According to the Atlanta Journal and Constitution, this white supremacist gang started in California in the 1970s, and they reached Georgia in the late 1990s, when there were more than 400 members at the time. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution story also quotes an Anti-Defamation League report that says, "The growth and spread of these white supremacist gangs has become one of the United States' most serious but least talked about white supremacist problems." Well, that makes total sense. White supremacy is the United States' most serious but least talked about problem. They're primarily drug dealers, meth in this case. Now, why isn't the white media saying that these are white men dealing poison to their own white people? Shouldn't that be the narrative? The white media loves to invite people to shame and attack black people by saying, why, these black drug dealers, they deal drugs to other black people. They deal drugs to their own people. As if black people are the only ones on planet Earth who have ever done that. Everyone who sells drugs sells them primarily to the people around them because that's who they know. And the meth epidemic, which is far larger than the crack epidemic ever was, with mostly addicts literally falling out in the streets, in McDonald's restaurants, even mothers getting high and overdosing while sitting in the parking lot of their child's elementary school, goes largely ignored. Nobody makes it a point to shame meth dealers and by extension the dominant society, telling them, hey, you're killing your own kind. Now, the Post and Courier reported that the Ghostface Gangsters are, quote, the fastest growing white gang in the country. Fastest growing white gang in the country. Did you get that? Probably not, because nobody in the white media was making any sort of big deal about that. This is probably the first time you've even heard of them before now. So you have a white supremacist prison gang dealing meth from coast to coast. They're the fastest growing white gang in the United States, and yet the white media isn't covering them, even when their members go on a cross-county crime spree shooting at the cops. Fastest growing white gang in the country, but they get treated like a local story in some rural Georgia or South Carolina backwater. They report on it like an isolated incident, totally unconnected from the national web of crime that it's connected to. And lest some of the trolls and white supremacist lurkers want to try to say this is overblown, there's already been hundreds of arrests of these Ghostface gangsters. Massive sting operations involving local, county, state, and federal operations, but you haven't heard about these, have you? In fact, I've only found literally a few white media websites that use the term white supremacist to describe them. The other 95% don't. They talk about them as a prison gang, but not primarily as white supremacist. And not surprisingly, the white media hasn't made much mention at all that the Ghostface Gangsters, this white supremacist prison gang, have murdered children. This white supremacist gang murdered a 14-year-old, Haley Adams, in Coweta County during a home invasion. To tell you how cowardly these white supremacists are, they shot her in the back. Now, this should have been national news. But it's not, because crime is racially pathologized by the white media. See, only black people commit crimes. That's their narrative. Because there's something wrong with black people, don't you know? And by deliberately not reporting these daily occurrences in these other communities, it's meant to solidify a myth that other groups don't do these kind of things, because if they did, why, the white media would certainly cover it. So black people are obviously an egregious criminal class. They're certainly more dangerous than everyone else, and using racially targeted media censorship, crime is artificially made to be a euphemism for black. The white news media and the white entertainment media have not and will not make any TV shows or movies about meth dealers like they did and still do with crack dealers. They refuse to tell the public the narrative that meth is a criminal issue. And Haley Adams was hardly a one-off. Other members of the Ghostface Gangsters have also been convicted of violating children, among other crimes against the young. The white media hasn't said a word about the 14-year-old murder of Haley Adams since the indictments in 2020. Nothing at all. Seems the Ghostface Gangsters aren't the only ones who didn't care about the life of Haley Adams. That would go against the white media narrative. You don't need to control white supremacist gangs in order to maintain white supremacy, but you do need to control black people, and you have to justify singling us out. So that means no mention of meth wars, because that's what this is. No matter how many addicts die, no matter how many children die, this is the evil that dare not speak its own name. And just to give you a small idea of how pervasive and large spread a problem this white supremacist gang is, consider these stats. In 2019, 43 members of the Ghostface Gangsters were convicted in what was a joint state-federal investigation with the colorful name Operation Vanilla Gorilla. These 43 thugs had 563 previous arrests between them. Let me repeat that for you, because you might not have caught that. These 43 thugs had a combined 561 previous arrests between them. That averages out to more than 10 arrests for each one of them. They've been in handcuffs more often than most people have been to the DMV. And that's not even the biggest mass arrest of Ghostface Gangsters in recent memory. In July 2021, a whopping 77 Ghostface Gangsters were arrested in a single action called Operation Kibosh, which is the largest gang arrest in the history of the state of Georgia. I want you to think about that, because the white media will try to tell you that, all this crime going on in Atlanta, you know where them black folks are. They try to put up these lies. Yeah, but what was the biggest mass arrest of gang members in the state? It wasn't in Atlanta, and it wasn't black folks. It was the Ghostface Gangsters. The biggest mass gang arrest in the history of the state. A historic-sized arrest, which you hadn't heard about before right now. Treated like a non-event by the white media. Now, that's just two of many police operations against the Ghostface Gangsters. I could give you more, but I'm not going to bore you with all that. You can look those up on your own very easily. A white supremacist gang that you never even heard of and the white media wasn't talking about. These creeps should be as well known, more well known, than the Bloods and the Crips, but they're not. You didn't even know about them until I brought them to your attention just now. I'll bet even a lot of you who live in Georgia weren't all that familiar with them. And keep in mind, it's racist punks like these Ghostface Gangsters and their pals who will go on the internet and say, why, black people commit all the crimes. They do that to keep attention off of themselves. And since the police are collaborators and more often than not direct members of these white supremacist gangs, they gladly cover for them and help keep their profile low until their violence inevitably explodes into the public eye and can't be concealed. Complexion for the protection applies outside of the courts more than it does inside. And I think we're all honest enough with ourselves to admit the feds won't be running to put any RICO charges on the 3 miscreants that I profiled at the beginning of this piece, and neither will any state authorities. You have a criminal syndicate, the meth head mafia, a known criminal gang who the police out there are letting operate until they eventually open fire on the cops, that is. And you know the crooked KK cops out there have been taking kickbacks and bribes and probably using the drugs that these inbreds make. So this is the other side of that story that I told you about a little over a week ago. These are the guys who got arrested. This is who they run with. And even with all this prior carnage that I've told you about, the police still aren't making a big deal about it, and the white media is not keeping tabs on them either. They're memory holding this stuff. They treat it like an isolated incident. Just don't report on it. Don't tell people that it's connected to a larger nationwide white supremacist criminal gang. Just mention the name of the gang in passing and move on quickly. People will naturally assume there must not be much important information about the Ghostface Gangsters. Otherwise, the white media will surely have reported on it. This is how the anti-black racist narrative is promoted and reinforced. Huge stories like these, enormous crime ring drug busts, and the brutal murder of a child, Haley Adams, is ignored. What ought to be dominating the headlines with Congress passing rafts of anti-white supremacist gang legislation is treated as a local Georgia story with the white media and the police handling it all very quietly. The fastest growing white gang in the country. And it's a non-event because of genetic immunity from law. I keep a continued eye on certain stories and topics that I've made videos on because of things like this. The murder of Jalen Walker prompted me to take out a few minutes to find examples of white suspects who actually did fire on police in a high-speed chase, which Walker hasn't been proven to have done, and the police aren't even directly accusing him of anymore. And then I see where 3 crooks got arrested in Georgia for doing this, but the police don't want to mention them. And then I look at their associations and we get to this. With all of these mass arrests and mass convictions that these scumbags have had, there's obviously no excuse. This is a racial agenda playing itself out by the white media. They're burying not only the meth epidemic, but also one of the fastest growing gangs in the country who's dealing the meth. You hear a lot about the south side of Chicago, but nothing about these massive meth-dealing, child-murdering white supremacist gangs in Georgia or anywhere else. Well, that's why the black media exists. The white media and the police think that they can maintain their anti-black criminal narrative if they merely refuse to mention the Ghostface killers at all. But we're here to show them that ploy doesn't stand a ghost of a chance. And that's this week's crime report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones that the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Sandra Bates, Joel Hunton, Carlos, Hildman Gallo, and KD. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.